Hello, this is Dr. Ron Bonstetter, and I'd love to have an opportunity to help you with a debrief of a report. This particular report is a school building, um, and I've removed all names of the particular school so that this video might be seen by others that have an interest in what the debrief can show and what it represents. The individuals receiving this will know that it is, in fact, their school. So this is a real debrief of a real building that was completed on April 27th of 2015. In the group report, we have a collection here of 29 individuals. In the report, there is the first introductory page that shouldn't be overlooked because it actually gives you working definitions of the things that really need to be dealt with in the report. So you can refer back to these so that you understand the difference between the stress index summary, the factors, and the group summaries. And those will be gone into detail here in a moment. So in terms of a debrief on this, if I were to go through this and just look at what I'm finding significant in it, the overview, this first page just gives you a brief overview of the big picture. And in the big picture, what we see here are about three areas that are above the 40 mark. And when I say 40, recognize down here that 40 and above represent elevated, significant, and severe stress. So any average that's above 40 probably has some things taking place that are at least in the elevated range, if not above. So in this particular situation, what we see are three that represent a being above. We have demand indexes above. We're going to go through these in more detail, but this is just a quick overview. Organizational change is above, and job security is above that 40, that magic 40 line. Let's take a look at where this breaks down. This was the group average. Now, if we look at five categories and we break down the percent of individuals that are represented within that index, we get a little bit different picture. So you see here that we start with little or no stress, limited stress, elevated stress, significant and severe stress. I just walked over and had the programmers make a change. So the next time you see this, you'll see white numbers, and white numbers. Because I'm going to make a decision here that anything above the elevated range, these three at the top, are worthy of consideration, and we should think about anything that's elevated, significant, or severe. And it's not that we're going to overlook the little or limited, but we're looking for areas that we might be able to address. So let's do that. Because I'm putting those together mentally in thinking about this, let's just talk about these in terms of a group. For example, the demands index would indicate that we have 55% of the population in this school above the 50% mark, above average, that 55% are concerned with that. We're 34% on rewards. We're 31. And then we jump again on organizational change, jumps all the way up to 69% in those three categories that are elevated or above. Then we're down to 10% here, 42% here. And then we're back up on job security to 61%, and then back down on 24% for the total. Recognize this assessment is it's an overview and it's diagnostic. There's no prescription here. I'm not saying any of these are good or bad. It has to be put in the context of the organization to determine whether this is good or bad. It may be simply the nature of the job, but recognize that at least it's giving you that snapshot of what's going on in your business or in this case, in the building. Let's break it down now into the 7 categories. The first category is demands on the job. Overall, 55% in those 3 headings, but we see a very significant difference when we break that subheading into subheadings. For example, within the demand, time management represents a 55% concern. 65% fit into that category, where job match is only a 31% concern. So here, time management and analysis of how the day is spent is creating some concerns. So that would be where the demand is fitting into that issue. Let's look at the second factor on effort and reward. I find it interesting that within the effort reward, you're really getting 34% total in the elevated or above, which is again below 50%. Uh, Meaningfulness, they find their job meaningful. You got 20% that have any concern whatsoever, really. But down here on workplace reward is a big anomaly. So here we go from 20% on workplace meaningfulness, and we jump all the way up to 66% on workplace recognition and reward. Basically, they don't feel like, people are sort of marching and excited about what they do on a day-to-day basis. When you consider education as a whole, the status in the United States, and so on, yeah, the pay, that's not unusual to see that. I wish we could figure out a creative way of addressing it. And maybe with these kinds of recognitions, we will. Let's look at control issues on the job. Overall, the control is not a major issue at 31%. And in what we break down here is workplace involvement does approach that 50% mark, though. It's at 45% that maybe wish they had a little more involvement in creating the environment and making the decisions. And then we drop all the way down to workplace empowerment. The autonomy and things is really not a major issue, with only 24% in that top three range. The next area that we do a sub breakdown is organizational change. Even before we look at this, I have to tell you that the culture of education is dominated by a behavioral type of S and Cs. And by definition, S and Cs are not real keen on change. They take a little longer, and they need a little more hand-holding, and they need to really understand why. So keeping that in mind, let's look at the figures. We have 69% that fall into elevated or above. And if we break down that 69% into subheadings of organizational change, we can look at organizational communication. 62% believe that there should be a little better mode of communication within the policies and procedures. We have 52% that are concerned with this organizational evolution. I can tell you that we're revisiting this concept of organizational evolution, and we're trying to redefine that a little better. So I don't know what to do with that number right now of 52%, because I think we're going to have to revisit what we mean by that internally. But I do feel pretty comfortable with organizational vision. Here we see a 69% fitting into those top three ranges. And I would say that there are people here that just really feel like there needs to be a little clearer vision, and then that vision needs to be communicated more effectively. So those are areas just to be aware of. I wouldn't say there's fire there. I would say there's smoke. Let's look at the manager or the supervisor. I don't know if you guys paid this guy off or what, but we've got let's look at the other side of the coin. Here we have 90% of the people have little or no stress whatsoever from their manager. And by the way, I consider that good. I don't consider that the guy doesn't exist or the lady doesn't exist. We're looking at 86% on management awareness. So they're aware of their style. And the overall procedures and situation, how they handle situations, again, 90% approval rate. I think any president in the United States would sure like that page for their Gallup poll results. Moving down to social support. This is sort of interesting. The social support, again, is broken into three subheadings. We've got 42% that have some concern with the social support within the building. And when we break it into its parts, we see that there's an avoidance that is actually elevated or above for 66% of the staff. So you've got some avoidance going on in the building, meaning that they think before they speak to somebody. They sort of go over who they're talking to, and they decide about what they're going to share and what they're not going to share. On the other hand, cooperation in the building is a 24% concern. So there seems to be an awful lot of cooperation going on in the building. And then lastly, we're at 45%, less than half, with any degree of frustration. I want to come back and visit this avoidance component when we look at another domain that I think sort of fits together and tells a better story. Let's look at job security. Within the job security, we have a 61% that have some concern. That's pretty high for an overhaul. When we break it down into its subcomponents, we see that what's driving that is this opportunity for advancement. And that is 72% of the staff are feeling like there's not the opportunity maybe they would like. Many years ago, I wrote an article that somewhere in the beginning of the article said that teaching was the only job that I could find where you were expected to do basically the same thing on the first day that you did on the last day 30 years later. And that's a concern. And so there's a new realm of management referred to as growing in place. And I think we need to help teachers grow in place and have them recognize that there are opportunities for advancement and that those advancements need to be brought to bear so that they feel that they are actually growing themselves rather than just helping students grow. The breakdown on job stability, 47%, less than half, and we're a little higher again on workplace trust at 55%. Of over half of the staff have a concern with workplace trust. I'd like you to combine this for a moment with the fact that they also said that there's a degree of avoidance in the building with who they talk to and what they share. When you combine these two bits of information, the family could be happier with each other, and maybe that's something that we could try to figure out where that unhappiness is coming from. Maybe not, but at least it's there. Again, it's smoke. Let's look at stress symptoms. This is the overall. In other words, we're trying to look at, we've looked at the workplace. Now, what about the individual? What's the individual stress level? We do this because you see they could be really stressed off scale on the job, but their stress index could be very low, or the inverse could occur. So we're trying to look at how this fits, how they in their lived life do overall. Overall, your staff has some stress. They're looking at 73% would say they have elevated or above stress in the building. Now, that could be coming from demands at home, whatever. How is it manifesting itself? When we do the breakdown, we see that it's manifesting itself with physical signs 31% of the time, but my more concern would be the 59% of the time that emotional stress and moodiness is a factor in their lived lives. I guess it's very good news that the cognitive stress is very low at 20%, and even their behaviors is below the 50 mark with about, 41% fitting into this category. Now, that was an overall stress. Now, here's some graphs that I think really help put things in perspective. For example, here's a scatter plot where if you look at demands, for example, you have an outlier. You have two individuals that are really feeling pressure. They're above 80 on a 100-point scale. And so they're feeling some pressure here that the demands of the job are, and you may or may not know those individuals, but recognize they're outliers. The same thing is true on organizational change. While it's elevated as a category, you have three individuals driving the average up who are much more concerned about the changes in the organization than people toward the bottom here. Then you have this huge cluster on management with everybody happy. I don't know what you do with this guy. You fire that lady or something. I don't know. But they're pretty happy people. And then social support is a little higher again. And then job security. You have one outlier, and there's an individual that's very stressed. It's getting toward the end of the year. I don't know. Maybe they feel like their job is in jeopardy. They haven't done as well as they could. They may not feel like they're being recognized for what they're trying to accomplish, but there's a stress level out there in that individual. Then we have our overall stress that, again, is for the most part a bell curve and representing a stretch, but nothing above 80%. This same information is provided now in a heat graph. The last graph in the report is this breakdown by percentage. So it's the same information you had previously, And I think the scattergram, I like this much better when we're like, let's say under 50 people in an organization. We go above 50, we're probably going to have to start dealing with percentages and look at the percentages that fit into each of these cells and break it down in a more manageable manner. So it's the same information, and what stands out again is everyone's low stress level and approval rate for the manager. I hope you have found this a useful overview and debrief for the report for the group. And this is an experiment on my part, and I thoroughly appreciate the opportunity to do this for you. And I really want to also thank you for being one of the very first buildings and very first organizations to experience our workplace stress instrument. Feedback is always appreciated. This is a beta version, and I will be in touch, and feel free to do the same thing and contact us. Have a great day.